Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation of the Old State Capitol, Then and Now. My name is Phyllis Evans and I am the Senior Director of Development for the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Foundation. And our Director of Membership, Jamie Stout, who usually does these programs, had a family emergency today, and so she's not able to join us. So I'm stepping in on her behalf and I'll do my best to fill her shoes. Tonight's program would not be possible without the ongoing generosity of our members. And as always, we thank you for your dedication in preserving Mr. Lincoln's legacy. Tonight, our special guest is Justin Blandford. Justin serves as the Superintendent of State Historic Sites in the capital city for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. He leads a dedicated team that is responsible for the visitor experience, preservation, and operations at 6 nationally significant museums and monuments, as well as the stewardship of more than 18 acres. The state historical sites in Springfield include the Lincoln Tomb, Illinois Veterans Memorial, Old State Capitol, Lincoln-Herndon Law Offices, Vachel Lindsay Homes, and the Dana Thomas House. He has more than 15 years of experience in museum management, historic preservation, and government operations. He enjoys collaborating with a diverse array of partners to develop meaningful and educational programs. Currently, he is working on a new outdoor series for spring 2021 called Walk, Hike, and Bike History. He has been involved in a number of significant preservation projects during his career, including Abraham Lincoln's Receiving Vault, the Lincoln-Herndon Law Offices, and the Illinois Governor's Mansion. He currently serves as a member of the Board of Directors of the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area, as a member of the Advisory Council for the Center for State Policy and Leadership and Sangamon Experience at the University of Illinois Springfield, and as a board chair for the Outlet, a faith-based mentoring organization. He earned a bachelor's degree in history from Webster University and a master's degree in history from the University of Springfield. For his civic and professional service, Justin has received the Illinois Tourism Conference Friend of Tourism Award, the Springfield Business Journal's 40 Under 40, Visit Springfield's Legendary Hospitality Award, and the Downtown Advocate Award for Downtown Springfield Incorporated. He has been inducted into both the Waterloo High School Legacy Society and the Webster University Student Life Hall of Fame. Outside of work, he spends time with his family and enjoys reading, running, and cooking. And he lives in Springfield with his wife, Holly Ray, and their 2 children, Greta and Jude. Justin, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And now I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to join our friends with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum Foundation and to get to connect with so many of its members. This evening, I hope to guide you on a bit of a story through the Old State Capitol. And it's not an easy task because I know many of you are very familiar with the building. And so I've tried to choose a few topics for us to talk about over the next half an hour that I hope you'll find exciting and refreshing and maybe enlightening. And hopefully you'll hear a few things that you've never heard before or perspectives on things that you've heard before that might be fresh. So again, I just want to thank everyone for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to join you and participate in this evening's program. So I'm going to launch our PowerPoint presentation so we can start and really be right there. Where'd it go? There we go. So let me jump back a little bit. And this is where we'll begin this evening with our Old State Capitol in the downtown square. That's the picture that many of us are familiar with, and with the manicured lawn and the building and things like that. But there's a lot that goes into this. And I really want to begin this evening by acknowledging that team effort. We have a team of 15 individuals who are part of what we refer to bureaucratically as the State Historic Sites at Springfield. And these individuals, mostly interpretive in nature, educational in nature, help keep the spirit of these sites alive every day for guests from throughout the country and across the globe. We are guided also in that by a group that I have to acknowledge, about on average 100 to 125 volunteers who serve us in various capacities. And again, as the Presidential Library and Museum knows, the volunteers are really the souls of our organization. They make it extra special and help us exceed expectations. So I want to thank that team that lives and breathes these sites every day in their professions, and also the volunteers who dedicate and volunteer so much time and energy to help us bring these sites to life. Phyllis mentioned, the breakdown. I think the breakdown of our facilities and the scope. I think the point that I want to revisit, though, that many people don't realize is the fact that there's 18 acres associated with our different museums, and we'll take a look at some pictures of those first here to get started. But the 18 acres is actually an interesting segue into a recent transition that many of you are aware of, that we get quite a few questions about as we moved from the Historic Preservation Agency a few years ago into the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. And as luck would have it, I think, and as the benefit of a bureaucracy would have it, we're uniquely situated really to continue our preservation mission, but also to explore, I think, in a better way, due to additional resources that are available to us in the Department of Natural Resources, in the Office of Land Management, the landscapes that are part of all of our sites. And so just visiting those again, we're going to focus mostly on the old state capitol, but want to take a walk around and go through the visuals of the different sites so you can understand the scope of what our team does and the nature of the full nature of our work. So we have the old state capitol, and nearby the Lincoln-Herndon law offices. Just a little bit further down the street over on 5th Street is the Vachel Lindsay Home. And then just about another 2.5 blocks west is the Frank Lloyd Wright designed Dana Thomas House. Finishing up out in Oak Ridge Cemetery, we have our 4 veteran memorials in Oak Ridge Cemetery, and of course, the Lincoln Tomb. We want to begin, sorry, my PowerPoint's jumping ahead a little bit. I want to begin talking about the early history of the old state capitol. And this is really, I think, a fascinating element for us. And I have up in front here the earliest image that we know of. If you look back to the masthead for the Illinois Journal, you'll see a woodcut engraving or a metal copperplate engraving that was used to make the first image that we can see in print historically. So again, as many images as many of us have seen of the old state capitol, this may be something that is a bit new for people, and you may not realize that the earliest known image in print that we can find is actually in the masthead of a local newspaper. But the early years, I think, are really interesting. As many of you know, Illinois was founded in 1818 and settled from the southern portion of the state up. And that really allowed for groups to gather fairly easily and do the business of government in the southern portion of the state, first in Kaskaskia and then in Vandalia. One of the great stories about the transition that I think is illustrative of government bureaucracy and the way decisions are made. Once they moved to Vandalia, they put a restriction on any movement, any discussion that would take place for 20 years. And so that began in 1820. And but already by 1837, it's essentially a done deal. So they didn't even make that initial embargo on the discussion of when to move before the capital city moved from Vandalia to Springfield. So we have that beginning capital city in Kaskaskia and then in Vandalia. And by 1837, at least on paper, the capital city has moved to Springfield. And what's interesting about that is we often look at that from the perspective of Western culture, from white settlement. But while this building was being built, there's an important occurrence that happens that we're aware of from the diary of one of the masons that's cutting stone on the building in 1838. And as he's working on the grounds, he notes that a group of Potawatomi Native Americans are moving through Springfield. And this is recorded in Mr. Irwin's diary. And I think what's interesting about that is that's something in our community and in the history of the old state capitol that hasn't been really discussed very much. We often talk about the position of the old state capitol and the migration and immigration that causes the state to expand in its population, and capital cities are then relocated so that there's access to government in the center of the state for people living throughout it. But we don't talk about some of the other areas that are often, more negative. And what's going on in 1838 in what we would consider, this westward migration, this movement west, is the displacement of Native Americans. And we have markers for that in our community, but they're really not doing the story justice. And so while tonight we're talking about then in the past, we're also talking about now. And so I'll touch on these things to kind of share some of the ways that we're trying to do a better job of telling a more complete and full story. If we're going to look back at the building and look back at the notes from John Rigg, the architect, and from the city fathers who raised the money, and for the state, officers who helped move the capital city, it's also important, I think, that we look at what else is going on around the building. And we have to acknowledge that, as this migration is happening and as these states are growing, this also caused the displacement from their homelands and from their culture of many, many Native Americans. And we see that in the fall in 1838, and right in the shadows of this building as it's being erected. So I think it's really important for us that we keep the dialogue of history going. And even though there's markers to the Potawatomi Trail of Death in our community, that we keep revisiting it and find ways to continue to tell a better story, tell a more truthful story, and reach a more clear picture of the past. I think what's also interesting about this image, if you will, although it's a static image and plain in its parts, between 1837 and 1847, what we really see is essentially the largest building in Illinois, and numerous groups coming forward, agricultural groups, medical groups, societal and cultural organizations who simply need a place to gather. And in many ways, that makes the early history of the building very fascinating because it begins to capture elements of our community. And as we'll talk later on, that's very important to us still today. So we see the building's roots in community. However, it's very important to note that early on, there were very strict exclusions on what we defined as community. And many people were not even allowed to be in the building or to use the building as a forum. One of the best examples of that is an abolitionist speaker named Ichabod Cotting. He was a minister. And in May of 1844, he was prevented from even delivering an abolitionist presentation in the building and physically removed, from the space. So again, we're working hard to uplift those stories and to bring attention to it so that we can help present the best picture of the past possible. As we move forward, one of the second stories that I wanted to share is about Francis Gage. And again, and I think in the past, this is something that many people haven't been too familiar with, but the Old State Capitol was a tremendous platform for individuals who were looking to make a case for change. And one of the ways that we want to look back and shed light on these individuals is by helping to provide a full spectrum of the viewpoints that were shared. And Frances Gage, whom you see in the picture, was one of the most important. She was very, very active, mostly around the St. Louis area, but other parts of the country as well, sharing the story of women's property rights. And what's interesting is just having left the anniversary of women's suffrage, we don't often think about other rights that were restricted from women in the 19th and early 20th century. But property rights were incredibly important, and it was a very, very important platform for early leaders like Frances Gage and others. And she is one of the individuals who makes the effort to come into this building and to have that discussion about property rights and the need to expand them in Illinois with Illinois legislators. So, that's, again, if you haven't been in the Old State Capitol in a while or looking to come back and learn more, she's one of the individuals we're focusing on, and we can see her presence clearly in the Old State Capitol. Moving ahead into the Civil War period, there is, I think, often a misunderstanding about the activity in the building. The Adjutant General's office, the work of the military certainly gets top billing, and it often captures all of our attention. But what is the truth of history is that during that time, women were extremely active in the building, playing a very, very important new role. And so the picture you see here is with the Ladies Soldiers Aid Society. And this is sort of the local branch, if you will, of a network that spanned throughout all northern states. And this is a fascinating picture because if you look closely, you can see that there's really just a fascinating illustration going on in the picture, although it's still in static. If you look back into the lady, the second from the right, in her hands is a scissors, and then we see what are bandages being held by two women in the back row. They're actually rolling cotton bandages coming down. You can see needlework in the hands of the lady sitting in the middle. And then down in front, we see women who are holding parts of care packages. And then in the front, what looked to be canned peaches or some type of canned fruit. And so during that Civil War period, 1861, 1862, women, again, using the size of the building, need a large space where they can come and organize medical supplies, organize different types of food, so that these items can be prepared and then shipped to Illinois soldiers who are wounded, often in the Confederate States. The governor, Governor Yates at the time, had organized these shipments to be moved on a ship called the Black Hawk, and it would, organize the supplies from different depots, if you will, such as the Old State Capitol, and help these items be moved to where they were needed most. So again, I think when we want to look back at the Civil War, we often want to remember or imagine Civil War soldiers, men, white men, moving around in the building. But the reality is that women were playing perhaps the most critical role. And as we learn more about the network of groups like the Ladies Soldiers Aid Society, we understand that it provided a fascinating platform for women following the Civil War, moving into areas such as healthcare, expanding roles in education, developing new roles in fields such as philanthropy. And all of these were different types of skills and openings in civil society that were created from this very grassroots local network during the Civil War. So we'll move on to another highlight in the Civil War period, which I think is perhaps the most important thing that happened in the building in the mid-19th century. And this is sort of a descriptor of that activity. But this is the ratification. This illustrates the ratification of the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery. And essentially what you're looking at is the telegraph note that was sent from Lyman Trumbull, Senator Lyman Trumbull, who co-authored the amendment. And he's giving notice to Oglesby that the constitutional amendment abolishing slavery passed by the Senate last session and passed the House and will be sent, and for Illinois to be the first to ratify. So this is I think just a fascinating document that you can imagine being read, by the governor. And what happens right after this in the first week of February is quite extraordinary, in that Oglesby and others organize the legislators to pass this, accept this ratification and allow for Illinois to be the very first. But there's more to it than that, in that one of the individuals who comes down, we're looking at an image of Jon Jones now. One of the individuals who comes down is an abolitionist, an outspoken abolitionist and critic of slavery, who is a lobbyist essentially for the elimination of the black codes in Illinois. Jon Jones had written a pamphlet about this. He had been an avid advocate for Black rights at the State House in 1848 during the Constitutional Convention, but he returns in this first week of February of 1865 while the legislature is gathered, in order to take them further. And I think this is just such an inspiring story because we alone, if the ratification of the 13th Amendment had gone through and taken place, and right there on itself, on its face, that would have been a phenomenal turning point. And we would still look back at that day as one of the most historic days in Illinois, an important day in our country's history as the first state takes the first step forward in the ratification of the amendment. But what's going on behind the scenes is that individuals like Jones are going for more. And they are seeking to remove laws that are on the books in Illinois that were restrictions to civil liberties for Blacks living in Illinois. And I think for many of us, we grew up in a time when we learn about Illinois being the free state and Illinois, being part of, this network where everyone is treated equally earlier on. And the more we learn about history, obviously we take the varnish off of that and get into the truth of it. And that's really part of what we have to, I think, get back at and do a better job of in Illinois is really helping everyone understand more of the restrictions that were on African Americans living in Illinois at the time. And so those Black laws, for example, did not allow Blacks to assemble. Freedom of assembly, gathering as a group of 2 or 3 in public was a right not afforded to Blacks living in Illinois. The ability to move, to simply move about your state freely was not permitted. Blacks had to have a certificate that they had to be able to present as they were in movement, and if caught without that, faced severe punishment. And so Jones is not able to testify against whites in a trial. Jones is successful in that effort in the first week of February, and after the passage of the ratification, the acceptance of the ratification of the 13th Amendment, he's there to push this further. And it's really, I think, something very special. We call it, at the Old State Capitol, One Amazing Week, and are going to be, we've done programming on this in the past. We're going to be doing more programming, more interpretation, more education on it in the future, because I think we have to look back at these times and continue to explore them, continue to uplift them, to truly make sure that more audiences, especially our youngest guests, can continue to learn about these important developments in the meaning of freedom in our history. So, we've got in quick succession, a lot of important developments. And then this next one is in April of 1866. You see here, obviously we have, I'm not sure what's going on with my PowerPoint. There we go. We have Frederick Douglass arriving in Springfield in April 3rd and 4th of 1866. And he's here for 2 evenings to speak on the the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and then on the second night on Reconstruction. This is such an important event because, as I referred to earlier, there's earlier instances in the building's history where an abolitionist speaker alone, a white abolitionist speaker, isn't allowed to speak. However, there are exceptions made for many other individuals to use the building as a platform. But what we see happen in 1866 with Frederick Douglass's presentations are, as we can tell, as best as we can tell, the first example of an African American being allowed to present freely in the Illinois State House. So this is an incredible development for our state, for the building itself. It's a major turning point, and a vast departure from the restrictive practices on freedom of speech in the building in earlier times. Moving along, jumping ahead quite a bit as we move through the program, I wanted to jump into the sort of the county history of the building. The Old State Capitol serves as the Capitol building from essentially 1840 until 1876. And then, as many of you know, the building transitions into a county building, and it's used by Sangamon County from 1877. In the late 1890s, there's a very dramatic change, and the building is raised one level and it becomes a 3-story county building at that time, and continues to serve as a county building until the end of 1965. And we don't often talk too much about what's going on, in that county building in the restored Old State Capitol. It was restored as the State House, and that has tended to be for 50 years what we focus on. But in the years ahead and presently, we're working hard to learn more about what was going on in the building in the years during when it served as a county courthouse. And one of the most historic and devastating events, tragic events in our state and local history that happened at that time that did have an impact on the building is the 1908 race riot. And in here we have a section of what's called the Broadax, and this is a Black newspaper from Chicago from 1908, and it is beginning to tell the description of the lynching and the devastation that's going on in Springfield. And this particular article is one of only a few that begins to detail the presence of a somewhat rarely known individual nowadays, whose name was Eugene Chafin. And Eugene Chafin is a presidential candidate who is, just by complete chance, in Springfield in the fall of 1908, in August, while the riot is going on. He's on the steps of the county building, on the grounds of the county building, giving a speech. And the mob, begins to cross the grounds. They're actually chasing a Black man, in pursuit of a Black man. And Eugene Chafin sees this happening. And in some movement, which is a little hard to discern historically to try to figure out exactly what happened, but it appears that he uses his body as a shield in order to give the Black man who's running away more distance from the mob. And when this happens, a member of the mob apparently picks up a brick of some sort, a rock or a brick, and throws it at Eugene Chafin, hitting him in the head and causing him harm. And I'm venturing to guess that this is a story, as much as we hear about and continue to learn about the 1908 race riot, this was new to us when we began investigating, and it's still not extremely well known. But what's amazing about that story is the unfolding and the way that it's covered. It's covered in this paper, this African-American newspaper in Chicago, covered in the New York Times, and a handful of other smaller papers around the country. But this is not very well known. And what prompted us to learn more about it is actually when, 100 years later, we have a presidential candidate visiting our city. We went back to do more research, and this is what we uncovered, this story of Eugene Chafin and this presidential candidate who becomes another witness to the 1908 race riots and the devastation, the harm, and the tragedy that unfolds at that time in our city. Now I want to shift gears a little bit. This is sort of the now portion, of the presentation, and I want to talk a little bit about, I think, some of the most meaningful things that we do here, at the building to stay connected to the values of democracy and to the history of the building. And so here we have a picture of, I think, one of the most important programs that we host in partnership with the federal courts. We host, again, prior to the pandemic, multiple times a year, we host naturalization ceremonies at the Old State Capitol. And so, we don't have these on the schedule right now. We're very hopeful and quite certain they'll return at some point. But, for those of you who have maybe attended one of these, I think it's a very important story, a testimony, if you will, for us to share in our communities. immigration and citizenship is a very, very important topic in our community, but we know really very little about it. And I think, for people who maybe attend the naturalization ceremonies or maybe talk to a friend who's going through the process, many of us learn for the first time that there isn't even an oath of citizenship. That's something we completely take for granted. But to hear the oath of citizenship in Representative Hall and to see, an individual cross over the final hurdle to citizenship and to take that important step in this building, I think is one of the most important things that's going on in our community, especially when we see so much dialogue about immigration and citizenship going on in our society. And so my challenge, or one of my challenges, I want to pass along to everybody who's been to one of these events, is to tell that story, to tell your family members or to tell your neighbors, just a positive story. Reflect on it and share what you experience, because I think that is a level of awareness that we need to increase in our community, and to tell the stories of the activities that are happening inside our museums. They're more than about the distant past. They're more than about historical figures such as Abraham Lincoln. They are about what's going on in our country right now. One of the other important types of events that we host, skipped over that one. That's a big one. One of the other important types of events that we host are national announcements. And I was fortunate enough to be the site superintendent in 2007 when we were contacted by the campaign office of then Senator and candidate Barack Obama for an announcement opportunity. And this was a fantastic professional opportunity, community opportunity, state opportunity. Whatever your politics are, I think this is something that all of us, should at some level embrace and realize the significance of, because it's quite important. And for us in Springfield, I know many of us carry very significant memories of being, in the area and watching this unfold. And in this particular picture that you see, this is a behind the scenes tour inside the building that candidate Obama took the night before. We were actually moving around, and he had just finished, I believe, conducting an interview with Steve Croft, 60 Minutes, downstairs in the State Library, and then took a casual walk through some of the rooms just to talk with us about history. And he's looking down at the desk in that room where Lincoln sat in the legislature in 1840. So this was a very historic opportunity, obviously, for the site. And in many ways, while we had national political visits in previous years, I think this really catapulted the building through the prominence of the House divided speech to a whole new level. And essentially in every political cycle since then, the building has been, has resurfaced and has participated in town hall meetings, additional policy announcements by candidates. This year in particular, we were a part of the roll call for the Democratic National Convention. And so I think it's very exciting. Again, regardless of your politics, it's exciting, I think, for the building to get this kind of national attention and to be uplifted by candidates of many different viewpoints that remind us to look back, again, mostly focusing on the Lincoln history, but I think also the significance of the House divided speech, the significance of the divisions that our country has faced in the past, and the significance of the unity that this building and many other sites illustrate that we've achieved in the past as well. Community meetings are another very important part of what we do. We host a number of community meetings for youth organizations, classrooms, educational associations, and many different types of professional organizations. And I tried to think back at the meeting that I'm most proud of hosting, or I find most memorable in recent years. And in March 23rd of 2018, we were contacted by the NAACP, and in the at the upper dais, you see Teresa Haley of the NAACP. But we were contacted, and space was requested for a signature of principles, sort of an agreement of principles, codes of conduct, if you will, in communication between chiefs of police and the NAACP. And so this was such a memorable day for me, because I remember the sort of the seriousness and also the sacredness of this agreement. And I just thought how awesome really it was that the building could be a host and an arena for individuals to come together proactively to seek agreement. And as we continue to face challenges in our country, as we continue to have dialogues about interactions with police and with our communities and the roles that are being played by law enforcement, I'm just super proud of the building and the way that its history invited people to come back for a dialogue, an open and friendly, a collegial, professional dialogue that I think moved many of our communities and our organizations that lead us to improvements like the NAACP closer together. And so this was a very important moment, I think, for me to be as a witness. And I'm proud to share it with all of you tonight, because obviously with things like this happening, you might have read about it in the newspaper. Chances are you didn't. You might not have seen it on the evening news. And it's something that becomes history. And if we don't bring it up again, if we don't talk about it, it becomes part of the past that runs the risk of being forgotten. We're getting close to the end of my time, but I also want to acknowledge the community events that we're a part of. And these run the range of Blues and Barbecue and the Legacy of Giving Festival, all the great events that Downtown Springfield Inc. sponsors that are hosted on the downtown square. And these are all things that our staff are extremely proud to be a part of. These are things that we have to invest in the grounds and in the upkeep and the maintenance of the building for. These are things your taxpayer dollars are being invested in. And we love when these audiences come together and participate in fun times that become also part of our community memory. And I'll close with another very important part of the now, of the things that we're involved in. And this is an image from a partnership that we're a part of with numerous community organizations and history organizations that led by my good friend Tim Townsend and the Lincoln Home National Historic Site. Tim many years ago got a group of us together and pulled many community organizations together into something called the Freedom Project. And this is an opportunity for us to have discussions, often organized around holidays. This particular picture was taken during I believe, a President's Day discussion that we hosted several years ago. And the significance to me is that, this isn't in the building, this isn't in the Old State Capitol, but it's things that the people who work in the Old State Capitol are investing in our community. Very important discussions with our youth to help share our history, to help bring people together and to help create important opportunities that, eventually connect either to mentoring opportunities, to additional program opportunities, or to even employment opportunities. And we're very proud to be a part of that in the community. And again, it may not be something that you're aware of, but that's really the joy of a program like this tonight, that we get to share with you some of the extra things that you're doing. And I hope that when you think about the Old State Capitol, instead of maybe the more typical thought that might go through your mind, such as, oh yeah, I've been there before, that was a great time, I don't need to go back. Pictures like the ones that we've presented this evening, I think might encourage you to take another look, to come back down and to take another view of what's going on, and to ask some questions and ask about the upcoming events. Follow us on Facebook and give us a call if there's anything that we can do for the groups that you're a part of. Because as you can see, we're heavily invested in the community, and we want to continue to play that role in the years to come. So that was very fun for me. thank you again, Phyllis and the Museum Foundation. And now I'd love to continue having a good time. If there's some questions, let's see if we can work through a few of those.
Yeah, we have lots of questions coming in. One of them, let's start off with the old state capitol. There's a lot of questions where people are asking about the interior of the Capitol building itself, wanting to know the colors of the carpeting, the drapes. How was that designed? Was there a design that was used to implement all those colors and drapes and carpet and everything?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal story. And, I'll reach on some, if I have an artifact that's nearby, I'll add a little movement to this since I'm not taking a virtual tour on the building, but I'm going to reach up and grab a prop real quick. So just bear with me. But my answer to that is reflects an artifact that's here on my wall. And, in my time, I was very fortunate to have a chance to meet Wally Henderson and Mr. Don Ferry and Mr. Augie Wisnowski. And those are the names of, and Mr. Wisnowski is still alive in our community and doing very well. Mr. Henderson and Mr. Ferry have both passed, but I'm thankful that I had the opportunity over many years to talk with them about that process. And what happened essentially, when the effort came about in the mid 1960s, 1965, 1966, to deconstruct the building and to reconstruct it, they reached out into the community for help. And of course, they did some of the work on their own. But a very important organization was the Junior League of Springfield. And the Junior League did research through the newspapers and in state documents to help paint the picture of what the building really looked like. We can also go into our archives. So I'll give a shout out to my friend Jon Jones and all the great people who work at the Illinois State Archives, because we can go over there through warrants and receipts and find the things that the state was buying at the time. And sometimes those receipts and invoices and things like that have great descriptions on them that actually include, images or descriptions of chairs and different things like that. So that's the way that the initial effort happened. And there's a handful of images from the inside. For example, there's an engraving that appeared in Frank Leslie's Illustrated History in the spring of 1860. That is, it would have been, summer of 1860. So an engraving that has the pattern of the carpet in it. And so that's an example where we could get it spot accurate. We could know the exact, pattern of the carpet, even the way the furniture was arranged for at least one certain day in that particular room. And then from there, we also build out onto accounts, letters that are written where somebody walks in and says something like, I went into the State House today and to the left was the auditor's office or something like that, So we use those accounts, and pulling all that together, we owe a tremendous debt to Mr. Ferry and Mr. Henderson and Mr. Wisnowski and all the community leaders in the 1960s who really put their heart and soul into that reconstruction effort. It was a tremendous gesture and a wonderful investment in this community that's really preserved our whole downtown, I think.
Good. So another question that's kind of along that same line, but a couple of the guests noticed or commented that there was a split rail in the office of Mr. Lincoln. Now, I'm not sure if that's in the Herndon office or if in an office he had in the old state capitol, but they want to know if you can tell them a little bit about that split rail, why it was there, and was it one of the rails that was used during the election campaign?
Well, we don't know for sure. So that's the trouble with, provenance. And I think for a lot of the artifacts that come in, we can't be 100% certain. So, we do have to put some criticism and some critique on it. But the story of the rail in that particular room is that it was one of the rails that Lincoln split with his cousin Hanks around Lerna, Illinois, which is the location of another one of our great state historic sites, the Lincoln Law Cabin. So we want to encourage you to go there as well. But that, was said to be one of the rails over in Decatur at the state level convention that was brought in when I believe Governor Oglesby coined the term rail splitter and marched in and announced Lincoln as the rail splitter candidate. Very interesting nickname. And I think it was really to help cover up the earlier nickname of Spotty Abe that Stephen Douglas had attached to Lincoln. And so they conjured up this notion, which Lincoln certainly was the rugged Westerner at the time. But that's the story of that rail. It's got a lot of sort of folk history oral history behind it, and so we have to acknowledge it for what it is. But there's a great story, certainly behind that artifact.
So Amy Keys asks, was Lincoln's body on view at the Capitol before his funeral?
Yes, it was. So when Lincoln's body arrived in Springfield after the journey from Washington, May 3rd to May 4th of 1865, his body rested in what's now Representative Hall. This has been very accurately recreated by Bob Riders and his team at the Presidential Library, where you see that scene of the casket. The one interesting difference is that the casket was open, is my understanding. But the Representative Hall was the setting for essentially Lincoln's final viewing or funeral, if you will, before the casket was closed and his body was taken to Oak Ridge Cemetery to be interned in the receiving vault that's at the bottom of the hill. Of course, the monument and burial place that we now recognize wasn't constructed yet. That wasn't finished yet. But the Representative Hall was the last viewing place for the public.
Right. So this is a little bit of a more of a modern question, but Drew Clark asks, what role was the old state capitol, has the old state capitol played as the creation and the development of the ALPLM museum occurred? Was there a combining of the two places?
Well, what's interesting about that is that in the lower level of the modern old state capitol, so when they reconstructed the building, they inserted space for a modern library underneath it in what would essentially be a modern stack area. And if you think about underneath the old state capitol, if you imagine in your mind's eye sort of a donut, and then in the hole of the donut would be where 5 levels of stack space, library space were created. And then the administrative offices for the State Historical Library were in some of those other areas underground or at the moat level, where my office is actually at right now. I'm at the northeast corner of the old state capitol right now on what we call level 3 on the inside, or the moat level. But the State Historical Library's offices existed in here after the building reopened in the mid-1960s, all the way until the Presidential Library was created. So the collections of the State Historical Library were here. And so, yeah, I think the building really is very much a part of that. And it's a part of the history that I'm very proud of. When I started, for just a number of weeks is when the move out was happening. And
Right.
So, yeah, that's very exciting for me. Those are very fond memories of good friends that I still keep in touch with, like Kim Bauer, and of course, my great friend, Catherine Harris, and many, many others who have worked at the library over the years. They spent many long years working at the old state capitol. I think they like their new office space a little better though.
Well, here's a question from someone you probably remember, Brian Andreessen.
Oh, Brian Andreessen.
Brian Andreessen.
Wow,
So he
that's
asked,
great.
there's great examples of updated interpretation at the old state capitol. Anything similar going on at the Tinsley building?
Well, Brian was a big piece of that, along with our good friend, Dr. Kathleen Thomas, many years ago. And so for those of you who haven't been in the Tinsley building recently, just about a couple years ago now, we struck a partnership up with the city of Springfield. And we were able to invest quite a bit of money in allowing the new visitor center to go into the ground floor of what was Seth Tinsley's store. And then on those upper levels, we are hopeful to be approaching a capital project, about $1 million investment to upgrade the restrooms in there and to repair some of the plaster on the inside and to upgrade some of the systems in that building. And then we can bring that Lincoln story and the story of the federal courts, the very famous Joseph Smith hearing that was in that space. We can then begin to bring that back in. And I know people like Dr. Andreessen and others have been following that building for a long time. And it's something we're continuing to push for as capital dollars become available. So I just want to, acknowledge Dr. Andreessen. He earlier in life was a lawyer whom I met when I was on my way to law school, and he encouraged me at that time, to think about the quality of life and the good work that could be done in history, and was very instrumental in opening my eyes to the opportunity that I'm currently enjoying. So I'm indebted to him, and I really thank him for his positive example and professional example. You mean a lot to me.
You've been around a long time. We've been around a long time together.
Right.
So Timothy Sheehan asks, Do you know where the county offices were located when the old state capitol was still being used?
The county offices, when the State House was the State House, many of those offices would have been, I believe, just across the street on 6th Street, just across the corner. Right over here at the intersection at near 6th and
Okay.
Washington. I believe that's
Alright.
where those would have been.
So this one is not about the old state capitol necessarily, but Susie Woods asked, do you know how long the Lynch Law remained on different municipality books in Illinois? Her grandmother, who's from Southern Illinois, talked about these laws still maybe being in place when she lived there in the 30s and the 40s.
That's right. That doesn't surprise me that they go on that long. And I think that in some towns, those laws, sometimes referred to as sundown towns, those laws, formal or informal, would have been very active into the middle of the 20th century and even beyond the civil rights movement period. So, again, that's not long ago that
No.
our communities were still struggling with civil rights and equality, and we've got a lot of work yet to do. And again, I think those kinds of questions generally reflect the importance of landmarks such as the old state capitol, other landmarks that are getting a lot of new and increased great attention today, like New Philadelphia, just a recent Chicago Tribune article about New Philadelphia and many others. So very, very important, I think, that we continue to use these places to educate people about the past, because some of the very harmful and unfortunate tragic things about our laws and the way there's a lack of respect in our communities, those are things that are still among us, and some of the most tragic are not that far away in our past.
That's for sure, very relevant. So another guest noted that many years ago, he visited the Capitol and saw many of Lincoln's artifacts, such as the handwritten copy of the Gettysburg Address, and maybe a part of Laura King's dress stained with President's blood were on display there. And he wants to know if there are still artifacts like that on display, or have they all been moved over to the museum, or how does that work?
Yeah, the artifacts that were part of the State Historical Library have been moved over generally to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. They were part of the State Historical Library collection, so you would have seen them because the library was functioning underneath the building, and they were bringing things up for display and for viewing. And many people tell us about that great memory of coming in and seeing the Gettysburg Address, and it was in a big wooden box.
Yes.
Essentially. Some people say that's the beginning of the presidential library, that they needed to get a better box. I've heard that version of the story before. It's a good story. There are about a dozen original items in the building's collection. And so we are actually right now working on a new education room in what had been the auditor's office, so that we can professionally exhibit those items and other items as well. We do have an active collection. We do currently, continue to take things in if it relates to our collection. And again, we have a wonderful partnership with the state archives to professionally house those for us when they're not on display. So there are many, many great artifacts. If you haven't been in recently, we have a wonderful Illinois regimental flag from the Illinois 95th Regiment. That's on exhibit, that's on loan from the State Military Museum. And then, of course, the classics like the portrait of Washington, the portrait of Lafayette, Lincoln's legislative desk, as well as the desk of other office holders like Orland Minor. Those things continue to help us recreate what those rooms would have been like during the State House's original period.
Amazing. So Mike asks, was the Ladies' Aid Society photo of local women, and was it taken in the old state capitol? And if so, do you know the source of the photo?
I can get that to Mike, so he can follow up with me afterward, and we'll be sure to get that source to you. But it is the local organization. That's what makes it so cool. Those are, very likely the women who were in here on a daily basis, using the sewing machines and organizing the food, rolling the bandages, feeding the veterans. There's one great story when the hospital that was nearby where veterans would have been cared for was full when a train of veterans comes in. So they actually bring them into the building and feed them, care for them that evening in the State House at the time. Very, very dramatic stories of care and kindness during the Civil War, and the Ladies Soldiers Aid Society is at the heart of them. So if you follow up with us afterward, justin.blandfordillinois.gov, we'll get you the source on that photo.
And that goes for any questions we don't get to
Yeah.
tonight. So one of the questions, well, there were several questions that asked specifically about the sites and like the Lincoln-Herndon Law Office and
Yeah.
the tours and your History Comes Alive tours and events.
Mhm.
And so why don't you talk a little bit about how you've managed during the pandemic, how it affects your schedule for being open and what people can expect coming up?
Well, it's been an experience. I'll say that. We learned a lot. Some of our team worked from home for a longer period of time, but myself and four others came back after being working from home for only 2 weeks. And so we've been here doing a lot of important things. And I think the most visible expression of that is the condition of the grounds, the condition of the building. We've been able to undertake many important projects. I'm sure as you've read articles about other museum professionals saying the same thing of, this was a great opportunity to get things done that you just couldn't get done before because of the demands of public programming and being open on a daily basis. So we came back and we really wanted to give the community the gift of beautiful places because we knew the outside spaces were going to be important. And so, for example, on the Old State Capitol grounds, which were designed by local architects, Mark and Lori McWilliams from Copper Tree, we were able to keep the walking paths and the garden beds just looking fantastic so that people would have a beautiful outdoor space in the downtown. And the same is true for the grounds around our veteran memorials and the grounds at the Lincoln Tomb, the grounds at the Dana Thomas House. So we really shifted outdoors, and that's where we got a lot of great ideas and material for the program that we're going to announce, Walk, Hike, and Bike History, in the coming weeks for the spring and summer and fall of 2021. But we were able to reopen in mid-July, and we stayed open from mid-July to mid-November. And it was really difficult because the patterns changed so much. The vibrancy of our downtown was gone, largely. And so there's very few visitors moving into downtown, but we were still open to take those reservations and provide those tours at the Old Capitol and the Dana House and the Vachel Lindsay Home. And we had a lot of visitors actually at the Lincoln Tomb because there's about 12 acres of open space. People felt very comfortable going there, and we were able to safely do that. But again, a real credit to the team here who helped keep those grounds looking good, who kept those projects going, and who made the sites safely ready for people to return when we were able to reopen in July and then again reopen again in late January. So we're open now, and you can visit our website, send us an email, give us a call. We do provide tours. We can make reservations when you arrive, for you. And we're glad to, begin to serve the public again and to be a part of those memories and those lessons that people want to build into their daily lives.
Good. We're excited too, because I know we've been closed for ever at the museum, and once we opened back up, we were also excited, and we're just ready for things to return to normal, whatever normal is. Right. Well, Justin, we're going to wrap it up, but I thank you again for joining us this evening. It's been a really informative program, and I hope everyone that's with us tonight will plan a trip soon to visit all of these amazing sites and start experiencing all that Springfield has to offer for Lincoln sites. So as always, tonight's presentation is recorded, and we'll share this with you on our Facebook page and our YouTube page, hopefully within the next 24 hours or so. And we encourage you to share this with others in your life and encourage them to become a member of the foundation so that they can also receive these benefits and join us for these great programs and experience history. The more we share history, the more we create the next generation of historians. So we want to make sure we do that. If you haven't already registered for our upcoming webinars, please make plans to do so. On February 24th, for the 4-speaker series, we have Professor Thavolia Glimpf to discuss her latest book, The Woman's Fight. And on Wednesday, March 3rd, for a very special conversation, you want to join us with our new president and CEO, Aaron Carlson Mast. And go to our website anytime for a complete list of the programs that are coming up. We do ask that following tonight's program, you take a short survey. This just helps us improve and helps us to know what types of events that you'd like to see us put out in the future. Like always, if you'd like to make a donation or contribution, please go to our website at www.alplm.org and make a donation to help keep this series going. So Justin will put your contact information out with the link so they can reach back out to you if we didn't get to their questions tonight. But otherwise, everyone, thank you for joining us this evening, and you have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.